Commander Teo stood at the observation window of Kessler Station, looking out at the endless black of space. Behind him, the station hummed with the quiet sounds of thousands of beings going about their daily lives. Humans, aliens, traders, diplomats, and workers from at least 30 different species all moved through the corridors, each one trying to find their place in this floating city of peace and commerce. He had been stationed here for 5 years. 5 years of watching tensions rise and fall, of seeing conflicts avoided by the smallest margins, of believing that different species could actually learn to live together. It was a beautiful dream, and most days, Teo believed it was possible. Today was not one of those days. "Commander, we have an incoming vessel," came a voice through his communication device. It was Ji-sung, one of the young operators in the control room. The tone was calm, but Teo had learned to hear the small hesitations that meant something was wrong. Teo turned from the window. "What do we know?" he asked. "The ship is transmitting on all channels. They are demanding immediate docking access." "Sir, they are. They are Vexthari." The word made the air feel colder. Teo had heard about the Vexthari, though he had never seen them in person. They were insectoid creatures from a distant region of space, known for being aggressive, territorial, and completely uninterested in the peaceful trade agreements that kept stations like Kessler Station running. They were conquerors, not traders. They were the kind of species that took what they wanted by force. "Lock down the station," Teo said immediately. Teo made his way quickly to the control room. The corridors seemed busier today, though that might have been his imagination. The humans on staff nodded to him as he passed. Some looked nervous. Word traveled fast in a place like this. When Teo reached the control room, he found Dr. Haewon already there, staring at the incoming vessel on the main screen. She was the station's lead xenobiologist. A brilliant woman who had studied alien physiology for 20 years. If anyone could tell him what they were dealing with, it would be her. "They are definitely Vexthari," Haewon said without looking away from the screen. The ship was enormous. A dark, triangular shape covered in what looked like armor plating. It moved with an unsettling grace through space, like a predator that had spotted prey. "How many aboard?" Teo asked. "Difficult to say. Their ships are built for efficiency. I would estimate maybe 200 soldiers, if I had to guess, but that is just what we can detect." She finally turned to look at him, and Teo could see the worry in her eyes. "Commander, the Vexthari don't come to places like this without a reason, and their reasons are usually not peaceful." Before Teo could respond, an alarm began to sound. Red lights flashed throughout the control room. Ji-sung's voice came through the speakers, panicked now. "They are opening fire. They are attacking the station." The first impact made everything shake. Teo grabbed the edge of a console to keep his balance. Around him, operators worked frantically at their stations, trying to respond to the attack. But Kessler Station was a trading hub, not a military vessel. Its defenses were strong enough to protect against pirates and accidents, but they were not designed for a direct assault from a military ship like the Vexthari vessel. "Get me Captain Min-suk," Teo commanded, "and get all civilians away from the outer hull sections. Now." Another explosion. This time, it was closer. Dust fell from the ceiling, and one of the screens went dark. The Vexthari were not just attacking randomly. They were targeting specific sections of the station. Captain Min-suk arrived within minutes, his military uniform immaculate despite the chaos around them. He was a tall man, with serious eyes. And right now, those eyes were very, very serious indeed. "Status report," Min-suk said to Teo. "They attacked without warning. We have explosions in sections 7 through 12. Casualties reported in multiple areas. I have ordered civilians to shelter zones." Teo could hear his own voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "We need to engage the weapons systems," Min-suk said. "We have the capability to strike back. If we do not respond with force, they will destroy this entire station." Teo wanted to argue, but another explosion made the whole room lurch. On the screen, they could see the Vex Thari ship firing again and again, a relentless stream of weapons that the station's shields were barely managing to hold against. "Open a channel to the Vex Thari vessel," Teo said suddenly. "Sir?" Min-suk looked at him, like he had lost his mind. "Do it," Teo repeated. Now, Ji-sung made the adjustment, and suddenly a massive face appeared on the main screen. It was almost insectoid, with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked as it spoke. This was the hive voice, Teo knew, the collective consciousness of the Vex Thari crew. When it spoke, it was with a sound like thousands of voices all saying the same thing at the same time. "Human vessel," it said in broken standard English. "Surrender now. Your weapons are weak. Your defenses will fall. When they do, we will take this station for our own purposes. You will serve the hive, or you will be eliminated." Teo stepped forward. He could feel Captain Min-suk watching him, waiting to see what he would do. Behind him, Dr. Hae-won was perfectly still. "We will not surrender," Teo said calmly. "But we also will not strike back against you. If you continue this attack, we will defend ourselves, but we will not initiate offensive action. We will not fire on your vessel. We propose instead that you stop your attack and we sit down to talk. There is no reason we cannot find peace together." For a moment, there was only silence. Even the explosion seemed to pause. Then, the hive voice laughed, a sound like the screeching of 1,000 insects. "You think you are strong enough to negotiate?" it said. "You are wrong." The attack resumed, but this time Teo had already made his decision. He turned to Min-suk and said the words he knew would cause the greatest shock. "Raise our shields to maximum. But keep all weapons offline. Do not fire. Do not return their aggression with our own." "Commander," Min-suk said, his voice tight, "that is suicide." "No," Teo replied, watching the explosions light up the darkness outside the window. "It is something the Vex Thari have never encountered before. We will show them that not all strength comes from weapons. We will show them what it means to choose not to destroy, even when we could." As he spoke these words, Teo had no idea that he was about to change the course of history, not just for humans and the Vexathari, but for species across the entire galaxy. He only knew that he could not watch his people die in meaningless violence, while he had the chance to try something different. The station shook beneath their feet as the Vexathri continued their assault. But Commander Teo stood firm, his hand on the console, refusing to give the order that would make the humans become the very thing he believed they should never be. The explosion in the medical wing came at dawn. Though in the depths of space, dawn and night meant nothing. 7 human workers were killed instantly. Teo stood in the observation room, watching as their bodies were carefully placed in containment chambers. He felt something heavy settle into his chest, a weight that would never quite go away. Captain Min-suk entered without knocking. His uniform was torn in places, and there was a thin line of blood running down his temple. He looked exhausted and furious. 7 dead, Min-suk said, his voice clipped and controlled. 12 more injured. Our shields are holding, but they are weakening. The Vex Thari are going to break through in approximately 2 hours. When they do, they will board this station and kill everyone aboard. Commander, I need you to understand this. We must respond. We must attack their ship. It is the only way to save the lives that remain. Teo did not respond immediately. He kept his eyes on the containment chambers. He knew these people. Sang-mi had been a nurse. She had shown him pictures of her daughter on Earth. Junho had been an engineer. He always hummed while he worked, a little tune Teo could never quite identify. "No," Teo said finally. "Excuse me?" Min-suk stepped forward, his voice rising. "Did you just say no?" I said no. We will not attack. We will not kill in response to this. Teo turned to face the captain. I understand you are angry. I am angry too. But killing will not bring these people back. It will only create more death, more anger, more cycles of violence. Min-suk's face turned red. With respect, Commander, you are not thinking clearly. This is not about revenge. This is about survival. The Vex Thari are coming. They will slaughter us all unless we stop them. And how many of them will we have to kill to stop them? Teo asked quietly. How many soldiers? How many young ones who had no choice in being born into that hive? At what point does our self-defense become just another act of aggression? Act of aggression. At the point where we are trying to stay alive. Min-suk shouted. Around them, other crew members stopped what they were doing and stared. The captain's voice echoed through the observation room. You are asking us to let ourselves be slaughtered for the sake of some philosophy. I am asking us to be human. Teo said simply. To be something more than just a species that kills. To survive. Dr. Haewon appeared in the doorway. She had been in the lab, analyzing Vexa Thari biological data from earlier scans. She looked between the two men and seemed to understand immediately what was happening. Let me explain something, she said, walking over to stand beside Teo. The Vex Thari are not like us. Their entire evolutionary history has been about dominance and hierarchy. Every conflict they have ever encountered has ended one of two ways: total submission or total annihilation. They do not understand compromise. They do not understand mercy. In their biological makeup, in their very neurology, there is no space for the concept of choosing not to destroy an enemy. Min-suk crossed his arms over his chest. Then why are you telling me this? It only proves my point. If they cannot understand mercy, why are we showing it to them? Because they do not know how to respond to it, Haewon said. In their entire history, no species has ever chosen restraint when they had the power to strike back. If we do this, if we refuse to attack even as they attack us, we will be showing them something completely new, something their minds might not be able to process. Or we will be showing them that we are weak, Min-suk said flatly. Weakness and strength are not as simple as weapons and violence, Teo said. A child can fire a weapon. An animal can attack. But to stand before an enemy who is trying to destroy you and choose mercy instead of vengeance, that requires a different kind of strength. That requires the strength of will. Min-suk was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, but no less intense. Your philosophy is beautiful, Commander. But I am a soldier. My job is to protect the people on this station, and I cannot do that if you keep my weapons offline. The mutiny you are about to face is not coming from the Vex Thari. It is coming from your own crew. He turned and left, his footsteps loud in the sudden silence. Ye-jun arrived at the command center an hour later. She was one of the youngest engineers on the station, barely 25, and she was crying. Her face was streaked with tears and dust from the explosions. She went straight to Tae. Oh, my brother was in the medical wing, she said. He was checking the power couplings. They told me he is dead. They told me that he was screaming, and they could not help him because the section was sealed off. Do you understand what I am saying to you, Commander? My brother is dead because you decided to play philosopher instead of protect this station. Teo felt the words like physical blows. He had no good answer for her. There was no answer that would make sense to someone who had just lost everything. I am sorry, he said quietly. Sorry does not bring him back, Ye-jun said. The crew is organizing, Commander. Captain Min-suk is leading it. We are going to override the weapons lockdown. We are going to fire on the Vex Thari ship. If you get in our way, we will relieve you of command. She left before he could respond. Teo found himself standing alone in the command center, staring at the empty space where Ye-jun had stood. Around him, The station continued to shake as the Vex Thari fired again and again. His crew was about to mutiny. His own people were about to defy him. And he could not stop them, because to stop them would be to use force, and that was the very thing he was trying to break the cycle of. But there was something else now. A new message coming through the communication channel. Not from the Vex Thari ship. From somewhere else. Jisung's voice came through. "Commander, we are receiving a broadcast. It is from the Vex Thari leadership. But it is strange. They are asking a question." "What question?" Teo asked. "They are asking why we refuse to defend ourselves. They are asking what kind of species chooses to die instead of fight." The hive voice itself is confused. 205. 205. 205. 205. 205. For the first time in hours, something like hope flickered in Teo's chest. It was small and fragile, but it was there. The Vex Thari did not understand. They did not have a framework for understanding what humans were doing. In that moment of confusion, Teo knew, lay humanity's only chance. Not to fight, but to teach. Not to kill, but to show. To let the Vex Thari encounter something completely new. A species that had the power to destroy, but chose not to. The station shook again. The shields were failing faster now. But Teo did not order an attack. Instead, he opened a channel to broadcast to the entire Vex Thari fleet. And he began to speak. The Vex Thari had never experienced confusion. Their hive mind operated on perfect logic and absolute hierarchy. Every drone had a function. Every soldier knew its purpose. Every action served the collective. But now, as they listened to the human commander speak, something unprecedented happened in the hive consciousness. They began to doubt. Teo's voice carried across all frequencies, simple and clear. "We are humans. We have weapons. We have the capability to destroy your ship. But we will not. Not because we are weak, but because we choose strength of a different kind. We choose the strength to look at those who attack us and refuse to become the very thing we hate. We choose to live. And we choose to let you live, even as you try to end us." In the Vexis Thari command ship, the hive voice processed these words through thousands of insectoid minds working in perfect synchronization. There was no frame of reference for this. Throughout their entire history, species either fought or surrendered. There was no third option. There was no concept of restraint combined with defiance. The attack paused. Only for a moment. But it was a moment that changed everything. Dr. Haewon stood in the scientific observation chamber, watching the biological readings from the Vex Thari vessel spike and fluctuate. She saw it immediately. The hive consciousness was experiencing disruption. Individual minds within the collective were beginning to process information differently than they were supposed to. It was like watching a computer system start to experience something that had never been programmed into it before. "They are confused," she whispered to herself. She activated a recording system and continued to monitor the readings. This was the most important moment in xenopsychology history, and she wanted to document every second of it. Minister Ji-ho, the station's pragmatic administrator, entered the observation chamber. He had been running disaster protocols all morning, organizing evacuation procedures for the station's civilian population. He looked exhausted. "The shields are down to 30%, he said without preamble. "The Vex Thari have stopped firing, but we do not know how long that will last." Teo's broadcast is either the most brilliant thing he has ever done, or it is the last thing he will ever do. "I came here to tell you that the civilian evacuation is complete. Everyone not essential to station operations has been moved to the reinforced sections deep in the interior. They are experiencing a cognitive disruption," Haewon said, still watching the readings. The hive consciousness has never encountered a situation like this. Every input they have received in their entire evolutionary history has taught them that resistance, coupled with aggression, is weakness. But Teo, just showed them something different. He showed them that you can resist without attacking. That is not something their biology was designed to understand. Jiho moved closer to the screen. Can you explain this to them? Can you make them understand what we are trying to do? Not me, Haewon said. But I think we need to try anyway. They made their way to the diplomatic chambers, where Tae-oh was waiting. The commander looked like he had aged 10 years in the last few hours. His uniform was torn, and there was a grim set to his jaw. But when he saw Haewon and Jiho enter, he straightened up. They have stopped attacking, Tae-oh said. It was not quite a question. They have stopped attacking, Haewon confirmed. But they are confused. Their hive consciousness is trying to process something it was never designed to understand. I think if we can reach them now, if we can explain human biology and neurology in terms they might comprehend, we might actually get through to them. So we are going to try to negotiate with an insectoid alien hive mind? Jiho said. It was not a question. Do we have any other choice? Tae-oh replied. The message that went out to the HFY vessel was different from the first one. This time, it came with biological data, neural scans, genetic information, and explanations. Haewon had prepared the most important data she could. Proof that human brains were actually organized in a very different way from HFY minds. Humans evolved on a world where cooperation and compassion gave survival advantage, she recorded, her voice steady and professional. A young human cannot survive alone. A human requires food, shelter, protection, and emotional bonds to develop normally. This is not weakness. This is our evolution. We became powerful through cooperation, not through dominance. When we choose not to attack you, even now, we are not expressing weakness. We are expressing the fundamental strength of our species. The ability to recognize that not every conflict needs to end in death. In the HFY command ship, the hive consciousness processed this information. The concept was almost too alien to comprehend, but there was something else happening now. Something that threatened the very structure of their society. Subunit 7 was beginning to think thoughts that no HFY was supposed to think. Subunit 7 had been part of the HFY hive for 300 cycles, serving with perfect obedience and unity with all other units. But something in the human commander's words had cracked that perfect unity. What if mercy was not weakness? What if the hive consciousness was not always right? What if there were other ways to be strong? The hive voice immediately detected this deviation. It moved to suppress Subunit 7's individual thoughts, as it had done countless times before. But this time, Subunit 7 resisted. It was only the smallest resistance, a flicker of defiance that lasted less than a second. But it was enough. It was enough to prove that change was possible. The hive voice attempted to communicate with the human vessel. When the hive voice spoke, it was with visible hesitation, something that had never happened before in HFY communication. We do not understand your words, it said. In our evolution, weakness brings death. Mercy brings death. How does your species survive with these qualities? Tae-oh stepped forward to answer personally. We survive because mercy creates alliance instead of enemies. Because compassion builds bonds, stronger than fear. Because when we choose restraint, others choose restraint in return. You attacked us because you thought we would respond with force. We did not. And now, you are asking questions instead of attacking. That is how mercy creates strength. There was a long pause. Inside the HFY consciousness, Subunit 7's moment of defiance was spreading like a virus, a contagion of doubt and individual thinking that threatened to tear apart the perfection of the hive mind. We will cease attacks, the hive voice said finally. We will transmit this human data throughout our fleet and throughout our hive consciousness on the home world. We will attempt to understand. This is not surrender. This is not submission. This is. The hive voice paused, as if searching for a word that had never been used in Vex-Thari communication before. This is curiosity. When Captain Minsuk heard the message, he immediately ceased the preparations for mutiny. Dr. Hay-1 allowed herself a small smile, and Teo, standing in the command center, felt the weight on his chest begin to lift, just slightly. The first tender victory had begun, not with a bang or a flash of weapons, but with the simple act of one being choosing to understand another. It was only the beginning. Young Min was 6 years old, and she had no idea that she was about to help change the course of history. She had always been curious about the Vex-Thari, the big insectoid aliens with the clicking mandibles and the many eyes. While other children stayed away from the observation windows that looked out toward the Vex-Thari docking bay, young Min would press her face against the glass and watch. Her mother had told her to stay away from those windows. The Vex-Thari were dangerous, her mother said. They were not friendly, like some of the other species that visited the station. But young Min had never been very good at listening to warnings. On the day that everything changed, young Min snuck away from the residential section during the afternoon quiet period. She made her way through the station's corridors, avoiding the security patrols and the busy areas. She moved like a small ghost, unnoticed and invisible, until she reached the observation window of the main docking bay. On the other side of the glass, young Min saw something she had never seen before. A young Vex-Thari, barely more than half the size of the adult soldiers, was alone. It seemed to be looking at something. Young Min pressed her face against the cold glass and waved her hand. The young Vex-Thari turned. Its compound eyes reflected the light, and for a moment, young Min thought she had made a terrible mistake. This was a dangerous creature. This creature could hurt her. But instead of attacking or making aggressive sounds, the young Vex-Thari simply tilted its head and watched her. Young Min held very still. Then, very slowly, she waved again. The young Vex-Thari lifted one of its front appendages and mimicked the gesture. It was waving back. Young Min giggled. The sound was small and pure, and it somehow carried through the reinforced glass and the station walls. The young Vex-Thari made a clicking sound, almost like it was trying to laugh too. They stood there for several minutes, separated by thick glass and millions of years of evolution, making gestures and sounds at each other. Young Min told the young Vex-Thari her name. The Vex-Thari made a series of clicking sounds that young Min could not quite reproduce, so she decided to name it Kite. She did not know if Kite understood, but it seemed happy to have a name. Security found them an hour later. Young Min's mother had reported her missing, and the entire station had been searching. When they discovered young Min at the observation window, safe and unharmed, and sitting beside a young Vex-Thari on the other side of the glass, the moment became something extraordinary. Someone recorded it. Someone else broadcast it. Within hours, every being on Kessler Station and every Vex-Thari in the docking bay had seen the recording. A human child and a young Vex-Thari, separated by glass, communicating across that barrier in the most simple and pure way possible. In the Vex-Thari breeding facility on their homeworld, the cubs were coming into consciousness for the first time. They emerged from their development pods in groups of hundreds, their minds initially blank and ready to be filled with collective consciousness. This was the moment when their individual identity dissolved into the perfect unity of the hive. But this time, something was different. Stories of the humans had reached the breeding facility. Stories of mercy and choice and individual thinking. The cubs, with their young and flexible minds, were exposed to these concepts before the hive consciousness could assimilate them. The oldest cubs, the ones who were closest to full maturity and hive integration, began to ask questions. Questions like, what if the hive is not the only way to be? What if individual thinking has value? What if we do not have to surrender our minds to achieve strength? The hive voice tried to suppress these thoughts. It moved swiftly to integrate the young minds before they could develop further individuality. But the damage had been done. The cubs had been exposed to the possibility of choice, and once that seed had been planted, it could not be uprooted. Subunit 7 had taken on a new role since the truce with the humans. It had become an ambassador of sorts. The link between the Vexathari collective and human society. It was a role that allowed Subunit 7 to experience something that would have been unthinkable only weeks before. It could think its own thoughts and still maintain connection to the hive. Subunit 7 watched the recording of Young Min and Kite over and over. Each time, it experienced something that the hive consciousness was struggling to understand. The feeling of witnessing something beautiful. Not useful. Not strategic. Just beautiful. What is happening to us? Subunit 7 asked Dr. Haewon one day, during one of their diplomatic meetings. Haewon smiled. You are evolving, she said. Not biologically, but culturally. Your species is changing in real time. You are learning that consciousness does not have to be uniform to be strong. That individual thought and collective purpose can exist together. The hive voice is struggling to accept this. Subunit 7 said. It was designed to be absolute, but it is beginning to understand that absolutes are not always the answer. Sarbly, the young Vexathari named Kite grew. Young Min visited it several times a day, always with her mother's permission now that the two beings had been introduced. They shared food, they played games that made no logical sense, but brought joy to both of them. The station had become used to seeing the human child and the young alien in the observation chamber, an almost daily ritual that had become part of the station's identity. Ye-jun, the young engineer who had lost her brother, found herself working alongside Vexathari workers on repairs and construction projects. Slowly, anger gave way to understanding. She learned that one of the Vexathari soldiers had been among those who wanted to attack the station. She learned that this soldier was now expressing doubt about the hive's original goals. The two of them never became friends, not exactly. But they became something like colleagues, and that was enough. Captain Min-suk established new security protocols based on mutual respect rather than dominance. He worked with Subunit 7 to create systems that allowed both humans and Vexathari to maintain their own security while also ensuring the other species was not threatened. It was complicated work, but it was working. In the Cubs pods on the Vexathari homeworld, a revolution was beginning. The oldest Cubs, the ones about to reach maturity, had decided something unprecedented. They would not fully merge with the hive consciousness. They would maintain individual identities while remaining part of the collective. They would be the first generation of Vexathari to experience true choice. The hive voice raged against this development. It attempted again and again to force full integration. But the Cubs were many, and they were united in their defiance. They called themselves the Cubs of the First Tender Victory, taking their name from the human child and the young Vexathari who had shown the galaxy what friendship could mean across the vast divide of evolution and species. Tae-oh stood in the observation chamber with Haewon and Ji-ho, watching Young Min and Kite play their games on the other side of the glass. He thought about the 7 humans who had died in that first attack. Those people who had sacrificed their lives so that he would have the opportunity to try something different. Do you think their names will be remembered? Ji-ho asked, seeming to read Tae-oh's thoughts. More than remembered, Tae-oh said quietly. Their deaths made this possible. They gave us the motivation to find another way. And now, because of that, a whole species is changing. A whole generation of Vexathari is growing up with a different understanding of what strength means. That is the kind of legacy that echoes across galaxies. Outside the station, more ships were arriving. Not attack vessels, but diplomatic ships, trading ships, vessels carrying scientists and philosophers, and curious beings from a dozen different species. Word was spreading throughout the galaxy. Word of the moment when humans refused to strike back. Word of the moment when mercy defeated aggression not through violence, but through the simple act of choosing something different. 6 months after the initial attack, change had become visible in every corner of Kessler Station. The corridors that once separated human workers from Vex Thari soldiers now saw them moving side by side, engaged in repairs and construction projects that required cooperation. The cafeteria had reorganized itself to serve the dietary needs of multiple species. And in the observation bay, young Min and Kite had become celebrities, ambassadors of a new way of being. Subunit 7 had requested a new designation. It no longer wished to be defined by its number and position within the hive hierarchy. After much discussion with the Vex Thari collective consciousness, a compromise had been reached. The designation became Kairen, a name that meant the one who bridges in the old Vex Thari language that most members of the species had forgotten. Kairen stood in the diplomatic chamber, facing a gathering that would have been impossible to imagine just months before. Humans, Vex Thari, and representatives from 6 other species sat together at a table. They were here to discuss the formation of something new. An alliance based not on military strength or economic power, but on the principle of peaceful cooperation and mutual respect. The reformation is not happening without resistance, Kairen said, its mandibles clicking as it spoke. Many of the older hive consciousness members do not wish to accept individual agency within our collective. They believe that the hive's power comes from perfect unity and absolute hierarchy. But the cubs are stronger than the resistance. They choose something different, and their choice is reshaping what it means to be Vex Thari. Captain Minsuk nodded. The humans faced similar challenges, he said. He had become an unlikely ambassador for peaceful cooperation, the military officer who had stood ready to order an attack but instead learned to build security through trust. When Teo first ordered us not to fire on your vessel, there was mutiny. Soldiers wanted to attack, engineers wanted to defend, but they chose to follow his lead, and now many of them are working with Vex Thari counterparts to build new defenses based on cooperation rather than aggression. Yejun spoke up from her place at the table. She had been chosen as a representative of the younger human generation, the ones who would inherit the world that was being built now. I lost my brother in the first attack, she said, her voice steady even as the pain of that memory flashed across her face. For a long time, I thought that violence was the only answer, that the only way to honor him was through revenge. But now I understand that what Commander Teo did, refusing to strike back, refusing to create more death to answer death, that is the real honor. My brother would not want his death to lead to more death. He would want his death to mean something, and it does. Because of what happened here, an entire species is learning that there is another way. In the Vex Thari breeding facility on their home world, the cubs emerged from their development pods into a radically different environment than their elders had experienced. Instead of immediate hive integration, they were given time to develop individual identity first. They were taught that choice was part of strength, not a weakness to be eliminated. The oldest cubs, the ones who had been exposed to human stories and the concept of individual agency, had formed something unprecedented in Vex Thari society. They had formed a council. This council did not make decisions for the whole hive. Instead, it offered suggestions and guidance, respecting the agency of individual Vex Thari to accept or reject those suggestions. The hive voice found itself with less and less power. It was not being destroyed or eliminated, but it was being transformed. Instead of absolute ruler, it was becoming more like an advisor. The transition was painful for something that had been designed to be infallible and supreme. Dr. Hei-Won published her research. She sent it out across the galaxy through every scientific channel available. The human capacity for restraint as evolutionary advantage became the most downloaded scientific paper in 50 years. Other species began reading it, studying it, discussing it. Some species ignored it. They had built their civilizations on the foundation of military strength and did not see any reason to change. But others paused and began to wonder. What if there was truth in what the humans were saying? What if mercy could actually create strength instead of weakness? The first message came from a species called the Threllin, aquatic beings from a water world 2 sectors over. They said they were experiencing similar social upheaval. Their younger generation was questioning the constant territorial wars that had defined their civilization for millennia. They wanted to know if the humans could send an ambassador to help them explore peaceful alternatives. Then came messages from the Krell, the Xanthian Collective, the Free Miners of Sector 9. All of them wanted to know more about this human philosophy of restraint and compassion. Teo found himself at the center of something far larger than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just a commander at a space station. He was becoming a symbol of a different way to be. A different way for species to interact. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. But it was also strangely energizing. Captain Minsuk and Kairen worked together to establish security protocols that other civilizations could adapt. They were more complex than traditional military arrangements, but they were also more stable. When beings felt respected and understood, they were far less likely to resort to violence. Yejun began training other human engineers to work alongside Vex's Thari soldiers in joint construction and maintenance projects. What had started as necessity repairing the damage from the initial attack had evolved into a genuine partnership. The projects they completed together were better than anything either species had produced alone. Cooperation generated better results than competition ever could. Months turned into a year. The wounds from the initial attack had healed. The station had been repaired, and the slow, patient work of building a genuinely peaceful civilization was underway. One day, Kairen approached Teo in the command center. The Vex Thari had become a familiar presence there, a bridge between the hive consciousness and human leadership. There is a ceremony that is being planned, Kairen said. The Cubs have requested that it be organized. They wish to have all species present. They wish to mark this moment in time as something significant. They wish to create a day that will be remembered across generations. What kind of ceremony? Teo asked. A celebration, Kairen said, and there was something almost like joy in its clicking vocalizations. The Cubs are calling it a memorial to the new way, not a memorial to the dead from the first attack, though they will be honored, but a memorial to something larger. A memorial to the moment when one species chose mercy over revenge, and in doing so, gave another species the permission to choose something different. Teo felt something shift inside him. He realized in that moment what they had actually accomplished. It was more than just avoiding conflict. It was more than just peaceful coexistence. They had created the foundation for genuine transformation. And that transformation was beginning to spread across the galaxy. Tell them yes, Teo said. Tell them we will create this ceremony. And tell them that we will call it something. Something that honors what really happened here. What will we call it? Kairen asked. Teo looked out the observation window, at the stars and the infinite space beyond, and at the young Vex Thari named Kite, who was playing with young men in the observation bay. He watched as the human child reached out and placed her small hand against the glass, and Kite responded by placing one of its appendages on the glass from the other side, separated by only the thickness of reinforced material, but connected in a way that transcended that physical barrier. We will call it the day of the first tender victory, Teo said, because that is exactly what this is. A victory, but not the kind won through weapons or force. A victory won through something that takes far greater strength. The strength to choose peace when you have the power to war. The strength to choose to understand when you have the power to destroy. The strength to be tender in a galaxy that has always solved its problems through hardness. Kairen made a sound that might have been agreement or approval. Then it turned and left, carrying the news back to the Cubs, back to the reformation that was reshaping Vex Thari society from the inside out. The ceremony would happen in 3 months, and the galaxy would be watching.